It's late November 2023, and it's still nice enough to come to the river, but I just can't wear my summer clothes because it is a bit chilly. So I want to reflect on 60 years, and it's amazing because 1963 I was 1 year old, and I still like a lot of that music, even though I didn't really learn it till maybe the 70s. But like the Beach Boys, the surf trend, Louie Louie, these were all big things in 1963. The cutting edge of that period was the surf music, especially like the Ventures or Dick Dale and the Deltones and Beach Boys. On this show I like talking about indie music because I like making independent-minded music. You'll notice birds communicate independently through singing without a record label or concert venue. So if birds can independently organize groups of birds to listen to them sing, why can't humans? In many ways, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen is like the ultimate indie music story, because it started off on a very small label and then got on a little bit bigger indie label, and then they beat out the major label version of the song Louie Louie. And in other words, the Kingsmen version was the big hit version, whereas others who tried to cover it didn't do as well on the charts. The singer, Jack Ely, only sang on that song, and he was the one who actually picked the song. It was a cover song written by Richard Berry in the 50s. And all these amazing stories surround the song Louie Louie. Like Richard Berry, an R&B singer-songwriter, ended up selling the rights to Louie Louie in the late 50s just so he could pay for his wedding, which was like $700. Now, do the Kingsmen play a part in Sacramento history? Yes, they do, because they opened for the Beach Boys in Sacramento at the Memorial Auditorium like the following summer after it had been a big hit in America. It started moving up the charts right after the JFK assassination in November 1963. It suddenly jumped up with some other energetic records, and by December it was in the top 10, and it was eventually a #1 song in January, actually on other charts besides Billboard. Billboard only listed it at #2. Interesting story behind that is some say that was a very conservative family who ran that magazine at that time, and they were pressured by music industry elites not to list a garage rock song at #1 on their chart. That's what Jack Ely, the singer of the Kingsmen, speculated in an interview, a radio interview that he did. They opened for the Beach Boys on August 1st, 1964 at the Memorial Auditorium, and that night was legendary for the Beach Boys because they recorded their first live album there. The Beach Boys were really hot at that time in the 63-64 era. That's when they really came on the scene. I mean, their first hit, Surfin' Safari, was 62, but their impact, like with Surfin' USA, was kind of the spring of 1963. And so they played in Sacramento throughout 1963. It was kind of like one of their favorite places to play. had a really loyal following in Sacramento. So they kept coming back to the Memorial Auditorium. Unfortunately, they canceled the show November 23rd, 1963, because that was due to the tragedy of the JFK assassination. So yeah, that was the next day. And they did make up that show in December. Their live album, it was called Beach Boys Concert, recorded August 1st, 1964, and then released a couple months later in October. And it became a #1 album. It included some of their biggest hits through that period. So that's a legendary album, and the fact that the Kingsmen opened that show, that puts them in the history books as well, especially these Sacramento history books. The Kingsmen recorded their version of Louie Louie in around April 1963, and they had been playing it for a year or two after singer Jack Ely had discovered at a party one night that this club with a jukebox kept playing the same song over and over and over again, and that was Louie Louie. The Kingsmen covered it, and around that time Paul Revere and the Raiders also covered it, and their version caught the ear of Columbia Records, which was like the biggest label at the time. And the only problem was that the head of the artist development there, the A&R division, Mitch Miller, hated rock and roll. He hated the young, vibrant beat that was emerging. Mitch Miller refused to promote the version by Paul Revere and the Raiders on Columbia Records. And so the Kingsmen, they actually were able to have a national hit as an independent group on an independent label, first at Jordan Records, and then they got picked up by a bigger indie label, and that was Wand Records. It turned out the Paul Revere and the Raiders version missed the Billboard Hot 100, whereas the Kingsmen version shot up to #2 on Billboard, but #1 on other charts like Record World and Cashbox. And Dick Clark's American Bandstand had it at #1. So that record actually only cost them $50 to make in the studio. Yet it sold millions of copies, so it generated millions of dollars. And it became one of the most popular cover songs of all time. Yet, out of all that, like out of 300 versions of it, the Kingsmen had the biggest hit with it. So what are some of the mistakes the Kingsmen made that indie musicians can learn from? The drummer of the Kingsmen, Lynn Easton, he decided to take over because his mom bought the trademark, paid for the trademark, therefore he said he owned the band name, the Kingsmen, and he decided that he wanted to be lead singer instead of drummer. And so he wanted to move Jack Ely, who had sung vocals on Louie Louie, he wanted to move him to drums. Jack didn't want to do it, so Jack Ely quit shortly after recording Louie Louie in the studio and before it became a national hit. And so then Lynn Easton took over as the lead vocalist, but he would lip sync to Louie Louie at shows and even on TV. Now eventually Jack Ely, who tried to get back in the band once it became a hit in November 1963, they wouldn't let him back in. As soon as this song started to hit in November, they
They ran into the studio. Actually, no, they went to a nightclub and recorded an album live. And so they did a bunch of covers, including Money, That's What I Want, which the Beatles had already recorded in 1963. That actually became their next single, the Kingsmen, after Louie Louie was a hit and fell off the charts around February. But it was kind of like a rushed version of songs, and it just, you could tell that it was like a garage band. And yet some of their other songs, like Death of an Angel, could have been a hit. Who knows if that had been the follow-up single. But they had one more hit, and that was a song called Jolly Green Giant, which was a top 10 hit like in 1965. And it was patterned after an earlier song by the Olympics. So Big Boy Pete was the name of the song that this song completely was a carbon copy of in terms of melody and rhythm. And so the problem was they rushed to throw this album of covers together, and it wasn't that memorable. Louie Louie overshadowed everything else they did, and Louie Louie was the voice of Jack Ely, the guy who discovered the song and wanted to record it, but didn't sing on any of their other records. That's kind of why the Kingsmen are a faceless band in some sense. Anyway, there's so much more to the Louie Louie story, like the FBI investigation. Yeah, the governor of Indiana got a letter from some teens that Louie Louie had dirty lyrics in it. So the governor notified the FBI, which started an investigation into the lyrics of Louie Louie in February of 1964. This investigation caused other stations to ban the record, but eventually the FBI, after just a few months, dropped the case because they couldn't figure out what singer Jack Ely was singing. So despite having a massive legendary hit, the Kingsmen had a major setback in spite of all that, and that was that they didn't get paid for decades. That's right, they actually made money from shows, but they didn't make royalties off of the record sales in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. They finally got paid in the 90s after suing the label that bought the recordings from Wand Records. So yeah, it took a long time, and eventually Jack Ely got paid as well. Now, I told you earlier how Lynn Easton of the Kingsmen was lip syncing to Jack's vocals at shows and on TV episodes. Well, a court order, like around 65, ordered the Kingsmen to stop doing that. So they had to start doing Louie Louie live. Songwriter Richard Berry also got paid eventually, like by the 1990s. He made a deal and started getting royalties off Louie Louie.